Joel Bakan, our guest, he is a scholar, a law professor, a professional jazz guitarist, married to a famous actor, all of that, and a father, most importantly, which, well, not most importantly, but certainly important. So, Childhood Under Siege, the chapter on pom-poms and pills. What prompted that?
Pom-poms for pills. Well, you know, I noticed my kids were coming home from school and talking like they'd just been at a pharmaceutical convention. That, you know, I think I have ADHD because I can't do my math. Oh, you know, this kid was acting out in school today. I think he forgot to take his meds. And it occurred to me, and I did further research, which this played out, that kids' culture today is very different from 30 years ago. It's now almost as common for kids to be on psychotropic drugs as it is for them to be on antibiotics for having sore throats. 30 years ago, it was almost unheard of for a kid to be diagnosed with a psychiatric disorder and put on powerful psychotropic drugs. And so obviously the question is why? Why?
And what's driving it? Who's driving it? Why?
And I think there are a number of factors. One is, I think, you know, and the sort of mainstream answer is that medicine has become better at detecting mental illness and diagnosing it and treating it, and that the drugs have become better. And I think there's some truth to that.
Sure.
But what I suggest in my book is there's another factor as well, and that is the efforts by pharmaceutical companies to influence medical science and to influence medical practice in ways that get doctors to prescribe and parents to go along with this, these powerful psychotropic drugs for kids' behavioral difficulties, often with seriously dangerous side effects, and often many people are suggesting unnecessarily or inappropriately.
But the pom-pom part, you suggest, is the cheerleader selling the drugs to the doctor, or they're courting the doctors.
Well, the pom-pom part is kind of, I guess, a double thing. One is that the pharmaceutical companies are cheerleading for pills, but there's a more literal dimension to it as well. And that is that when you look at the armies of what are called drug reps that pharmaceutical companies hire to sit in doctors' offices and try to meet with doctors in between visits with patients and basically promote certain drugs. When you look at the staffing of those positions, there is an inordinate number of former cheerleaders. The idea being, as one doctor expressed, that you know, when people are physically attractive, they tend to be more persuasive. And so the drug companies basically equip these many former cheerleaders and these very sort of attractive young people. They give them gifts that they can give doctors. They give them budgets to take doctors out to dinner. And you know, when you think about this, this isn't exactly how you want your doctor to be influenced to prescribe a particular drug. And it's just one tactic that the companies are using to try to push
and
their
I
drugs.
want to be self-responsible as a patient too. When my doctor suggests I need this particular drug, I need to ask why, and also choose a doctor who doesn't push pills.
But you know, that's
that too.
Absolutely, but that's where the problem happens. I'll give you an example, and it's a tragic example from the story. A girl named Caitlin McIntosh who was having some emotional difficulties, and she and her doctor and her parents decided the best way to deal with this was by putting her on a couple of antidepressant drugs called Zoloft and Paxil. And at the time, the doctors thought this was a great drug and there were no problems with it and that there were no serious side effects, and the parents thought the same, and all of that. As it turned out, the companies had been doing studies on these drugs and finding that they increased the likelihood of kids engaging in suicidal behavior. So that when adults took the drugs, it was fine, but when kids or teens took the drugs, it increased suicidal behavior. Caitlin McIntosh hung herself while she was on these drugs in the bathroom at her school with a pair of shoelaces. And the problem there is, as vigilant as that parent, her father, Jeffrey McIntosh, and her mother were, they could not have known this because the studies had been done, but the companies had decided not to publish them. And obviously, from a company perspective, that's what you'll do. You'll publish the studies that turn out well, and you'll not publish the ones that don't. And there's no law that says that a company has to publish studies that reveal those kind of adverse results.
And that's really interesting. And the number of kids you point out in the book who take dangerous psychotropic drugs.
And the problem,
who are prescribed
psychotropic
drugs.
And the problem is that when you put together things like the bearing of adverse data, when you put together other tactics that companies are using, like the cheerleader, and also the fact that over the last 30 years, companies have become much more involved in controlling the actual research that's being done on drugs, and therefore on manipulating various variables that can help it. You know, when you put it all together, and you say, well, the parent should be able to inform himself or herself, or the doctor should. The problem is that the whole field of knowledge is tilted in the direction of the interests of the pharmaceutical firms.
Sure.
And that puts the parent and even the doctor in a difficult place.
And you inflate the diagnosis, really, of the disorder, and on it goes. What about toxic chemicals? There was a story in the book about a mother who saw orange goo oozing out of the ground.
Yeah, in Sydney, Nova Scotia, and it's a story, and it's a very sad story. The tar ponds around the old Sydney, Nova Scotia steel mills, and basically there's no question that the ground in Sydney around those steel mills is incredibly toxic with very, very toxic chemicals. But governments and industry have not taken responsibility for it, because they say, despite the fact there are higher rates of cancer, despite the fact that kids are being born at higher rates with various birth defects and deformities, despite all of that, we can't see that there's a direct causal link between the chemicals and those problems. And what I suggest in the book is that therein lies the problem. We're never going to find, our science isn't good enough to say that we can say for sure that that chemical caused that problem. What we can do is we can see these kinds of correlations, and we can use our common sense and say that those incredibly high rates of cancer and problems are likely connected in some way to these. Okay.
Whether it's asthma or cancer or autism or a birth defect.
And the problem is that when you look at the world that kids are living in today, the amount of chemicals being produced and put into their environments and imported, and this is from the US, has increased 75-fold in 30 years.
It's incredible. And the new industrial chemicals that are being dumped.
26,000 new industrial chemicals have been produced in the last 30 years as well, and many of them are suspected of causing problems like phthalates, bisphenol A. These are chemicals that are being shown to cause serious problems, especially in kids. Because the thing about a kid is they're not fully formed yet, so their biological systems are still developing, and you've got hormones that are switching genes on and off.
Right.
And so there are processes of development that can be interfered with by a chemical that can lead to the biological system not developing properly, say a respiratory system, and you end up with asthma. So kids are more vulnerable to these toxins because they're still developing.
Sure. What's inside a can of soup?
A lot of bisphenol A, because it's in the lining of the plastic lining around the can. Bisphenol A, which has been shown in rodent studies at least, in very small doses to cause everything from obesity to heart disease to diabetes.
And remember when they were pulling all the plastic baby bottles off the shelves? Oops.
Again, bisphenol A.
Go back to glass.
That's right. And I will say,
or some others.
In Canada, we are ahead of the curve on this because we have regulations concerning bisphenol A that most of the rest of the world don't.
Right, but we're not ahead of the curve on child labor laws.
No, unfortunately, we're not, and especially in this province of British Columbia. You know, we watch these old movies like Grapes of Wrath, and we say, "Oh my God," you know, thank God. Or we, read Charles Dickens, and we say, "Well, thankfully, we've moved on from there." But not in this province necessarily. The worldwide norm for a minimum age for work is about 15. In the United States, it's 14. In British Columbia, it was 15 until 2004, when Gordon Campbell's Liberal government decided to roll it back to 12. And that gives us the distinction in British Columbia of having one of the most permissive child labor laws in the world.
Why 12? Any idea?
You know, 12 is the age in the United States that kids can work in the agricultural sector.
Right.
I suppose it's
On the farm.
On the farm, even though 14 is in the regular economy. I guess 12 is considered the age, was considered the age by this government or that government in its wisdom when it's appropriate for kids to work. And, you know, we can have a debate about that. I think it's worth pointing out that it's very much out of step with how the rest of the world sees
And you're not talking about kids doing chores. That's not what this is about.
No, and I'm very clear that there's a difference between child work and child labor.
For sure.
Yeah.
We know that.
No, I want my kids to do chores. In fact, I don't think they do enough.
Right. Me too. Childhood Under Siege, soon to be a documentary, I'm thinking.
Yep, working on it.
What do you want to change because of this one?
I guess what I want to change, I mean, I think for the most part, parents their intentions are good and they try to do a good job. What I want to do with this book is inform them so that they can make better choices. But even more than that, I want to try to create a discussion and a debate about the appropriate role of public policy in trying to create conditions that make it easier for them to do their job.
Where to start or end?
Nice
Thank
to see you
you.
again.
Nice to see you again. Joel Bakan teaches at UBC, a law professor, law scholar. Childhood Under Siege, his new book, How Big Business Targets Children.